I want you to look at this chart. I want you to look at this chart right here. Take a good, long, hard look at it. What do you see? Obviously, left to right is over a function of time. Obviously, the chart is going down. And this is a price of something. You can see it's getting weaker and weaker, lower highs, lower lows. And right now, in this very bottom right-hand corner here, it's nearing all-time lows. What chart is this? Is this some cryptocurrency? Is this some sort of watch trading or forex trading or flipping couches or cars or some kind of speculative market like that? What market is this? This is the US bond market. Over the last 5 years, this is the US bond market in terms of something stable, perhaps the dollar, perhaps the euro, perhaps land, maybe gold. No, this is the US bond market in terms of Bitcoin. That's right. The US bond market is falling in terms of Bitcoin. The most liquid, lowest risk asset in the world, American bonds, are falling against what is often reported as an extremely high risk and extremely volatile form of digital e-cash magic internet money. Now, this goes against a lot of preconceived notions, but it's really important to understand why this is important to say and why it's important to realize that this chart is showing that the market is going to crash probably at least 80% in the relative near future here. So before I get into that, this actually is not a new prediction of mine. This is a prediction I made a while ago, 8 months ago, before the recording of this video. Actually, I made this prediction. It was bold and people didn't like it. People found it controversial, but hey, I made it. It was the first podcast I'd ever been on talking about Bitcoin, the bond market, and everything else. And I made this prediction during that podcast in January of 2023 that Bitcoin was going to continue to go up and that the bond market was going to fall 80% against Bitcoin in the coming years. Now, why did I make this prediction then? Why am I making this video today? It comes down to this chart here. This chart is global currencies over the last 10 years, a percent change versus the US dollar. Now, obviously, we can see there's a lot of red on the screen. In fact, every currency, every single currency is red. If we go into the bottom right-hand corner here, we can see more stable currencies like the Swiss franc or the other forms of dollars, the shekel or dinar. All those, are anywhere from 1% to less than 10% down against the US dollar over 10 years, which is not that bad. If we zoom out, though, we can see that well over half of this chart, these currencies have lost 30%, 40%, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and in a few cases, well over 99%. And it's worth reemphasizing that the loss between 99% and 99.9% is extremely dramatic. As we get as we get perpetually closer down to negative 100% loss, the losses become greater and greater. So what's the point of looking at this? And why do I have this prediction here? Well, we have to think of first principles of what is money, how do we communicate economic value, okay? Let's say we take the global amount of wealth today and we divide it into 1 million individual parts. All the houses, all the companies, all the economic output of the world, not just GDP, but everything on the planet, everything that we can own, all the stuff that we make and produce, divide it into 1 million equal parts. Now, if we take this thought experiment and go into the future with this theoretical 1 million subdivision of all the wealth in the world, what happens? Well, if we're pricing future prosperity in terms of that present 1 million division, the prices of everything fall down. Because if you divide all the food of today into 1 million equal baskets, and there's more food in the future, the relative purchasing power of food in terms of those 1 million subdivisions goes down. Over time, as we produce more stuff, we produce more energy, we produce more housing, more energy, more food. As we produce more stuff, the prices of things go down. Life becomes more prosperous. I'm recording this on what would be considered a supercomputer to former generations with a professional microphone and lights and a beautiful house that's heated. This is luxury that I would not have been able to afford 100 years ago, and most certainly not 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. As our species and our society advances, we have more and more prosperity. And as we have more of that prosperity, the relative purchasing power of that, again, in terms of that fixed percentage, that fixed unit of global wealth, goes down. So prices should come down. Now, why is it that prices go up over time? We see it. This house is more expensive this year than it was last year. Okay, things are more expensive now than they've ever been before. And the fundamental reason why this occurs is because of something that I call political currency. Okay, it's what you typically just call money or cash. Okay, what is political currency? Political currency is this. This is political currency, ones and zeros that are issued by a government. You can see here a couple different kinds of political currency. One of these kinds of political currency is called the Bolivar. This is one of the worst performing fiat currencies in all of history, and definitely the worst one in the last 10 years. And the other one is the best performing political currency, aka the US dollar. Now you'll see that they don't look that different. See, one is a set of ones and zeros that's basically worthless, and the other one is a set of ones and zeros that, relatively speaking, has a lot of worth. They look the same. They're both printed on very similar kinds of material, and they're distributed in similar ways. The only thing backing the relative strength of this one set of ones and zeros against the other set of ones and zeros is the ability of the managers of that set of ones and zeros to enforce the population to use it. What gives the US dollar its value is the ability for the American government to tax, to have its military, and to use its government forces to confiscate taxes. Okay, if we could print money, if we could just add ones and zeros into the global economy and create prosperity, there is no reason to have taxes. Why do we have taxes if we can just print money and make everything fine? The reason is because you don't make things fine when you print money. See, the reason these currencies, the reason these other countries print so much money and have their purchasing power lose against the US dollar so greatly is because we want to preserve credit markets. We all like to borrow debt. We all like to take the prosperity of tomorrow and bring it forward to today in terms of debt. And to service that, we're often faced with this problem. If we have this fixed number of units or percentages and prices are going down in the future as productivity is bringing prices down and we borrow money, our debt is getting more expensive in the future. And we don't like that. We don't like it when our debt gets more expensive. And governments, which are the biggest borrowers in the world, certainly don't like that. And so what do? As the free market's trying to bring prices down, we force prices back up by creating new ones and zeros to fill the gap. Now, here's a problem. As technological progress accelerates and things get faster and faster, and we're forcing prices down faster and faster, and everything becomes more digital faster and faster, we are forced to create new currency units. We're forced to create more artificial numbers out of thin air. And this is where Bitcoin comes in. Bitcoin is that fixed line, and we are pricing things in terms of that. Let's go back to the chart of the American bond market here. Okay, let's take a look at this. Again, this is the American bond market or 10-year in terms of Bitcoin. Extremely weak chart over the course of 5 years. Okay, same chart here. Now we're looking at 3 different dots. The blue dot, which you see here over to the left, is when I personally realized that the American bond market and all the bond markets of the world, therefore, were broken. This was in early 2020. The orange dot, about 8-9 months later, is when I realized that Bitcoin had a unique position in protecting my purchasing power and my money and my wealth against the failure of these bonds. And again, the red dot over to the right is where we are today. The time from the blue dot to the orange dot, I lost a lot of my purchasing power because I didn't yet understand Bitcoin. And likewise, over the last 3 years, between the orange dot in late 2020 and the red dot to today in late 2023, bonds have continued to fall at an incredible pace. And it's important to mention that this is in the face of extreme market uncertainty. Okay, this is a real chart. This is the profit and losses of the American Federal Reserve, the American Central Bank, over the last 12 years. This is a real chart. There's no gimmicks here. There's no funny business here. From 2011 to 2022, it was pretty stable, all things normal. And then in mid-2022, things began to become unhinged. And now we're well below zero, where the Federal Reserve is facing losses more than they ever have before. Let's go to another example. This is a 20-year Treasury bond ETF. Okay, from 2002, this is a longer time period now. We're not looking at 12 years, we're looking at over 20 years, nearly a quarter of a century. Okay, we have wiped out nearly 20 years of gains in this particular bond ETF in the last year or so. Now, why is the demand for this government debt going down? Is because we are forced to print more and more of these currency units to debase ourselves more and more. We are inherently taking the prosperity gains from the future to consume them today to finance our debt. And then as we pull the future to today and consume it, there is increasingly less and less of an economic future for us to have. And so as we're destroying that for the sake of today and preserving our credit markets today, People are becoming more and more pessimistic on the government's ability to repay their bonds in currency that's going to have its value. There are only two options here. Either we will default in real terms or we will default in nominal terms. If we default in real terms, that means that we simply print more currency and we pay you back, sure, 100%, but in terms of currency that's slightly worth less. And again, this is why all those examples of other governments do this. Now, the other example is to default in nominal terms, and nobody likes that. You don't get elected if you default in nominal terms, so we'll avoid it. Let's get to an example of that right here. Late last year, late last year, late this year, just recently, late 2023, the Bank of Japan has hiked the bond buy as a benchmark of yields hit decade peak. Okay, what does that mean? What's that in simple speak? It means that the market doesn't want Japan's bonds. So Japan is buying their own bonds because nobody wants it. It's as if you creating your own credit card debt and then buying your own credit card debt because no one will lend to you. Okay, this is a major, major problem. Likewise, if we look to late last year, the Bank of England was only a few hours away from their pension funds completely unraveling. Okay, again, this would have been a nominal default. Pension funds would have gone bust. Many, many people would have lost a portion, if not the entirety, of their retirement savings or their life savings. And because nobody likes a nominal default, we will instead default in real terms and print more currency. Now, this did not just happen once in the UK. This has happened twice. This has now happened twice now in recent history. Let's take a look at America, okay? This right here, all these little dots, this is 2008. This is the 2008 Great Financial Crisis. You can see that blue dot there, a major bank failure that led to all the little gray dots being other bank failures. So again, this is over an x-axis of time, and you can see that there was one major bank failure that led to all these numerous other bank failures in the course of the Great Financial Crisis. Okay, three of the four largest bank failures in American history, adjusted for inflation, have happened this year in 2023. You can see those three blue dots to the right. Now, this does not necessarily mean we're going to have a financial crisis significantly worse than the Great Financial Crisis. However, it's something to take note of. We've had three comparable-sized bank failures this year as we did in the months leading up to the 2008 crisis. Okay, and again, all these things are connected. They're all connected to human nature. This is not some conspiracy. This is not lizard people. This is not people in some closed room trying to make life worse. It's simple incentive structures. Every politician, every lobbyist, every president, every senator, every representative, every lawyer, every constituent, okay, every citizen, every landlord, every tenant, every mortgage broker, and every bank, every single person in every corner of society wants us to continue to create currency. Because if we don't create currency, prices go down. And if prices go down, people default on their loans. People lose their jobs. There is pain. And we don't like that pain. So we will continue printing currency to avoid the pain. The problem is, though, when you do that, it increases reliance on debt. We don't want house prices to go down because everyone's going to become bankrupt. So what do? We come in, we inject money, we force prices to go back up, and therefore require an increased level of debt for people to be able to purchase these homes, to finance their companies, or to live everyday life. This is why people are increasingly reliant on debt, when people increasingly don't want to be reliant on debt. This is why so many of the complexities and things we're seeing in life are getting significantly worse. And again, this is not a conspiracy. This is not some sort of fear-mongering of a Great Depression or something like that. It's simple incentive structures. It's what humans have always done, and it's what we will continue to do. Okay, because again, keep in mind, the US government is the largest indebted organization in the world. We are $33 trillion of US national debt. Over 8% of this has been added in the last 4 months. For the first time, we have surpassed $100,000 of debt per US citizen. And far more concerning is not this number, which you've probably seen once or twice before on the evening news. It's the unfunded liabilities. That's a number 6 times larger than this amount. That's $1.4 million of unfunded liabilities per American taxpayer. Every man and woman, okay, every minor, every 14-year-old, every 75-year-old, and every working class person, everyone that paid taxes in the United States owes $1.4 million of money. By definition, we don't have a specific plan to pay back. Okay, would you trust your neighbor if you suddenly gave them a $1.4 million loan based on their income? Would you trust them with that? Would you trust yourself with that? Would you trust your kids with that? What about your parents? What about your whole neighborhood? What about your whole country? Okay, when you are buying American debt, that is what you're buying. And that is precisely why American debt, in terms of magic internet money, something that people still don't understand, something that people still don't believe in and don't understand. That's why it's going down. Okay, since that blue dot at the beginning of the COVID lockdowns, the pandemic and everything, the trust in American debt has continued to fall at an increasing rate. And we've seen that even more so in the rest of the world with their currencies and their bonds. They're doing significantly worse than here in the United States. Okay, this is how weak it is. Now, where are we going in the future? We're probably going to continue going down with volatility, and it'll take time. Obviously, this is many years. Now we're looking maybe 4 or 5 years in the future, but this is my prediction. This is the direction I think we are going. I have been pounding the table on Bitcoin since that orange dot there in the middle of this chart. I've been pounding the table, begging people to get off zero, to buy a little bit of Bitcoin, to consider selling some of their bonds, and instead of trusting a bunch of human beings in control of ones and zeros that they can create out of thin air, to instead allocate a little bit of their trust away from these political currency units, away from these ones and zeros that humans can control, into a series of ones and zeros that computers control, that humans don't know how to stop the computers from controlling. It's an extremely simple line of code, it's an extremely simple algorithm, and because it's the longest, because it's the best one, because it's backed by electric energy and not proof of stake, this is the difference between proof of work and proof of stake. Because of this reason, this is why other cryptocurrencies are far inferior when it comes to Bitcoin. And so if we look out into the future, that's probably where things are going to head, in my personal opinion. And probably if we look at even farther, so again, zooming out, maybe another 5-10 years or so, probably that will be dwarfed again. So again, for context, between this orange dot and this red dot, we've already had at least a 60 or 70% loss in bonds in terms of Bitcoin. And so again, the prediction, the clickbait of this video, the title of this video, predicting 80% loss, it's not clickbait, it's not fear-mongering. In fact, it's already happened multiple times, and it's probably going to happen again perpetually into the future. This would be an 80% loss of what we're looking at right here. And then, like I said, we're probably looking at an additional 80% loss in the following years after that. And then we're probably looking at a continued 80% loss in the years after that. It may sound crazy, it may sound absurd, but again, I've been pounding this table for 3 years, the exact same message, and people still are having a 0% allocation to Bitcoin. I go on all these podcasts, I make all these videos, I do all these tweets. My content over the last 8 months has amassed over 33 million views across my social media platforms, and people still are not understanding the message. They're still not buying Bitcoin. They still have 60, 70% of their portfolio in bonds, and they forget to realize that as bonds become a smaller percentage of their portfolio due to the bonds losing value, just with the way portfolio rebalancing works, you continue to sell off your stocks in order to get more bonds. You are selling the assets that are less weak for the assets that are even weaker. That's the problem with rebalancing a portfolio between different kinds of assets that are all going down against Bitcoin. And that's really important to say. It's not just the US bond market that's going to fall 80% in the next few years. It's probably every other currency as well. Every other currency, every other market, every other asset class, everything is probably going to fall 80% against Bitcoin in the next few years. In the same way that we saw all these inferior storages of energy, in the same way we saw all these inferior currencies fall against the dollar perpetually into the future, we'll probably see all assets continue to fall against Bitcoin perpetually into the future as well, okay? Again, this chart, this table you're looking at here is not the US dollar going up in purchasing power. You're watching every other currency fall. If you're looking at the US dollar through the lens of the lira, what do you see? A number that's going up and to the right. If you look at the lira through the lens of the US dollar, what do you see? A number that is going down and to the right. Your frame of reference is everything. Your perspective is everything. Your vantage point is everything. It's the way you view the world. It's the way you view your stability. It's the way you view your inherent risk. And it's the way you view your volatility. And this is really important to emphasize, because right now people look at Bitcoin and the US dollar and they still laugh at me. Still, 3 years later, I've been pounding the table on this asset. And they say, oh, wow, look, Luke, you're such a weirdo. You're so crazy. It's gone down over 57% since its all-time highs on October 29th, 2021, 2 years ago. Wow, you must be so sad. Wow, haha, what a loser. But again, I remind you that bonds have fallen to an even greater degree than Bitcoin has fallen in terms of the US dollar. It entirely depends on your vantage point and which currency you're viewing the world. And this is with an American bias. Again, this is the best currency in the world. What about the rest of the currencies in the world? Okay, this is Bitcoin in Nigeria. Bitcoin in Nigeria is near all-time highs. Okay, what about Bitcoin in Argentina? Bitcoin is not only near all-time highs, it has smashed through all-time highs and trading for unprecedented levels in the Argentinian peso. And again, this is a G20 nation. This is a major country. It's one of the largest economic powerhouses of South America. And again, G20 country. This is Bitcoin in their currency. Okay. Now, as a side note, Argentina has a major presidential candidate as a pro-Bitcoiner. That's something to keep in mind, that in a few months, we could be looking at a president of a G20 nation that is open and pro-Bitcoin. Now, let's look at another example here. Let's not just look at Nigeria or Argentina. Let's look at Turkey, another G20 country where Bitcoin is at all-time highs in their local political currency. Let's go to a fourth example, and perhaps the most dramatic one. Well, yes, the most dramatic one. This is Lebanon. Bitcoin had a vertical spike where it went up tenfold in official rates. Now, in official rates, it is 442 million Lebanese pounds here. Okay, 442 million Lebanese pounds. Okay, that's the official rate. The unofficial rate is 10 times that. 10 times that. Bitcoin is trading for 4 billion Lebanese pounds in their local currency. And it is worth emphasizing, it is worth reminding that this was incredibly rapid. This was incredibly sudden. Overnight, Bitcoin skyrocketed in their local political currency. Okay, this is important to emphasize and re-emphasize, because no matter how many times I talk about this over the last years, people still don't understand. These things happen incredibly quickly. You hear about bank runs in history. You hear about entire things unraveling in the past. You hear about Ponzi schemes and yield reserve. You hear about all these things like, wow, suddenly overnight it was gone. Yes, that's probably what we're looking at here. Okay. In the same way that I'm showing this chart before with US bonds trending down, you can see how for years, nothing will happen. It'll just go sideways. And then like this orange dot, it will suddenly, rapidly accelerate downwards. We saw the same thing in 2017 over here to the left. We're seeing a similar thing today with this red dot. It's continuing to accelerate downwards despite unprecedented rises in interest rates and despite unprecedented economic uncertainty. Okay, what's the probability of this? How confident am I in this? Okay, what does history say? We talk about how you have to learn from history, open up a history textbook, and you can learn about it. What does history say? In the last 225 years, 98% of the nations that have surpassed the debt levels that we currently have had in the last 3 years, 98% of them result in one of three places within 15 years. Default, hyperinflation, or war. Okay, let me say that again. The United States in 2020 surpassed debt levels 3 years ago now. At that orange dot I was showing you in that chart, 3 years ago now, the United States crossed sovereign debt levels that 98% of empires, nation states, and countries have descended into hyperinflation, default, or war within 15 years. And the 2% simply took longer. Okay? If you want to assume the United States has a 10x better odds than the average country of the last quarter millennia, well, then you're still looking at 80% probability that within the next 12 years or so, 2035 or sooner, perhaps, maybe a little longer, maybe a little shorter, who knows? I surely don't know. But you're looking at well over 70, 80% chance that either everything is going to default, or that everything is going to hyperinflate, or that we're going to go to war. Okay, people think I'm a pessimist. People think I do fear-mongering clickbait. People think that I'm this emotional, rash person, when in reality, I hope and pray we have the default, because the alternate is war, at least historically speaking. That's just the truth. Now, what are other people saying? I'm just a 24-year-old. Maybe you think I'm crazy. Maybe I'm crazy. What I would say is that either I am slowly descending into insanity, or the rest of the world is already insane. So let's not talk about this 24-year-old recording on his computer talking to you. Let's talk about one of the largest asset managers in the world, Larry Fink. Larry Fink was in charge of BlackRock, the CEO of BlackRock. In 2017, he called Bitcoin an index of money laundering, okay? $9 trillion under this company's management for millions and millions of people across the West and across the world. He called Bitcoin an index of money laundering 5 years ago at the beginning of that chart that you saw at the beginning of this video. Here's what he has said recently. In 2020 and 2021, he began talking about how clients have no interest in Bitcoin. He talked about how clients were interested. So instead of calling Bitcoin an index or money laundering, he just said clients are interested, and so we are interested to service a product. In late 2021 and into 2022, Larry Fink said that clients want to talk about Bitcoin more than anything. Clients were clicking on BlackRock's articles and publications and analysis of Bitcoin more than any other subject by a factor of 10. Just a few weeks ago here in 2023, Larry Fink said that Bitcoin is a flight to quality in the face of uncertainty. We have the war in Ukraine and Russia. We have the war now in the Middle East with Hamas, Palestine, Israel, and all the other complexities there, including Iran. Okay. And again, like I said, hyperinflation, default, or war. Russia has nuclear weapons. Iran, debatably, is either working on nuclear weapons or has nuclear weapons. The United States obviously has nuclear weapons, and Israel has nuclear weapons. We now have 4 of these nations here that are heavily involved and heavily incentivized in the conflicts going on. Why? Because it's a battle of resources. And money is the mechanism at which we communicate resources and we communicate economic value. And as our forms of money are becoming less stable, as we are forced to print faster and faster and create more and more currency units, that's why this instability rises up. That's why it bubbles up, and that's why it occurs. And in the face of that uncertainty, Bitcoin is that stability. It is that flat line. It is that certainty. It is that stability that Larry Fink, who oversees $9 trillion, is talking about. Okay. Now, what is this quote here? This quote is from Michael Saylor. He's a billionaire. He only manages tens of billions instead of single-digit trillions. So he's only a billionaire. So, you know, a little less money under his management. But this is what he has said in his perspective. He said, take all your money, buy Bitcoin. Take all your time, figure out how to borrow more money to buy more Bitcoin. Take your time to figure out what you can sell to buy more Bitcoin. And the Bitcoin is going up indefinitely. Michael Saylor said Bitcoin's going to $5 million and that it's going up 500x beyond that, and that it's going up forever. Okay, maybe Michael Saylor is insane. Maybe I'm insane. Maybe Larry Fink is insane. Edward Snowden might be insane. He supports Bitcoin. Julian Assange might be insane, but he supports Bitcoin. Peter Thiel might be insane. Drunken Miller might be insane. Everyone, all of these high net worth people that you're seeing more and more talk in the news about this, you have to understand when they're talking about Bitcoin, they understand it is inherently in a zero-sum game with bonds and political currency. Okay, in 30 years, in 50 years, there will not be a world where the base layer is both bonds and Bitcoin. They inherently can't coexist. And I'll get to this more in a little while towards the end of this video. But what does this mean into the future? What, again, the title of this video is about 80% market crash. What does that look like for us? Again, it's all about your perspective shift, okay? Most people look at Bitcoin and they think it's going up with volatility forever. My encouragement is for you to shift your perspective and look at the market from the other vantage point, okay? Bitcoin is a mountain, everything else is a ship, and you're looking at each other. If you're looking at Bitcoin from the ship that is sinking, what you see is something going up and up and up indefinitely. If you're on the mountain looking down at the ship, what you see is something going down indefinitely, okay? And simply changing your denominator and looking at the world through a different lens changes your worldview. This video here has Bitcoin as this flat orange line here at the top. Okay, all these other lines are various different assets falling against Bitcoin over time. Okay, we have the S&P 500, United States real estate, the best real estate market in the world. You have gold, you have Nigerian currency, the Turkish currency, and the Argentine currency, which we looked at those 3 earlier. Notice how all of them, every single one of them, is falling down against Bitcoin in the last 5 years perpetually. Down, 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 up here and there as people perceive Bitcoin as crashing. But no matter what, whether you're looking on whatever time scale, over the long term, not in the short term, but over the long term, as Bitcoin retains this stability, everything else is continuing to fall against it. Okay. And when at the beginning of this video, I talked about how, what if you subdivided all the wealth in the world by 1 million components? This is the idea of Bitcoin, except the number is 21 million, not 1 million. You can divide all the wealth in the world by 21 million, and that should be the purchasing power of 1 Bitcoin. And as we produce more wealth in the future, the value of Bitcoin, the relative value in Bitcoin, in terms of housing, in terms of energy, in terms of food, in terms of everything else, will go up indefinitely. And so if you own the American stock market, if you own the American real estate market, if you own these political currencies, if you own metals like gold or copper or tin, if you own these things and you're trying to save your economic purchasing power in them as a function of time, if you're trying to preserve your economic energy, you are about to witness the purchasing power of your assets go down dramatically. I would argue by 60, 70, 80%. Again, then to be followed by another 50, 60, 70, 80%. And again, most people still do not realize this. I know this video is getting a little long, but it must be emphasized. I have been pounding the table on this for 3 years since that orange dot. I've been proven right again and again and again. Bank failures, the failure of bonds, the rise of Bitcoin, the survival of Bitcoin. It has still marched on. Hash rate is at all-time highs. Users are at all-time highs. The decentralization of the network is at all-time highs. Nodes for the network is at all-time highs. Every aspect of Bitcoin is at all-time highs. And now we are at the point where bonds have fallen so much against Bitcoin in recent weeks that they are close to all-time highs yet again. And so if we look out into the future, that red line. That's probably the direction with volatility that bonds and every other market are trending. And then the orange line, the years after that, it will continue again with volatility, and again, it will take years. And then with the green line, it'll happen again and again. And yet people still, even then, will call me crazy. They'll call me a grifter. They'll call me a scammer. They'll call me an idiot. They'll call me insane. They'll call me a naive 24-year-old. But at the end of the day, is that either I'm insane or the rest of the world is. And I think the rest of the world is looking at this from the entirely wrong vantage point. This is what most people see when they look at Bitcoin. A volatile line that's going up and down, crashing, this unpredictable, unstable thing, when in reality, it's the complete opposite. If you look at Bitcoin through the lens of US bonds, the quote-unquote most safe asset in the world, the quote-unquote most liquid and most stable asset in the world, it's doing nothing but going down in terms of Bitcoin. But most people will continue to view it as a speculative bubble that's going up and up forever. They will misidentify the mountain as a sinking ship when they themselves are on the sinking ship. And as a final point, people often hear about the FTX thing, and people still, to this day, for whatever reason, throw this in my face and talk about, oh, wow, isn't Bitcoin dead because the whole FTX fraud and scandal and that? Oh, haha, look, you're so crazy for buying Bitcoin when it's down from highs. Don't you know it's going to zero? Aren't you crazy? Why do you still talk about this? I don't need to do this. I'm just going to keep with my quote unquote safe investments of real estate and stocks and bonds and pretend like everything's fine. Why are you buying this? Why are you gambling all this FTX garbage? My warning to you is that FTX is no different. In the same way that a government political currency is simply a series of ones and zeros organized by a board of humans that are elected by a public body, the only difference with FTX was that it was a series of ones and zeros also controlled by human beings, except it was just a smaller company and corporation. This is the value of FTX's token in terms of Bitcoin over time. You'll notice that for a long time, for years, it had this little decline downwards, went up and down with volatility, pretty big losses. We're looking at 50, 60, 70% losses here. And then here in late 2022, November 2022, an absolute gutting, absolutely collapsed and complete obliteration from there, okay? My point is that if you are someone that is within the FTX ecosystem, if you are someone that is in a political jurisdiction like Lebanon, like Turkey, like Argentina, or like any other nation in the world besides the United States, this is incredibly urgent for you. If you're in the United States or if you're in Europe, this is a little less urgent, because your currency happens to be a little stronger, and therefore people will perceive Bitcoin as not being near all-time highs. But whatever the case, no matter where, you're in some garbage yield token, you're in some garbage political currency, the end trajectory is the same, that all these things are trending down indefinitely. And this message is no different than what I've been saying over the last 8 months. Again, this video I posted was from January of 2023. Bitcoin has doubled since then, okay? The American bond market has fallen dramatically since then. We've had multiple instances of bank failures. We've had multiple instances of yield curve control and absolute ridiculousness in the market, okay? And it's worth keeping in mind that all these things are connected. And no matter how much people think I'm a conspiracy theorist, like this person on the screen here, this person pointing to all these different things and saying they're connected, I get it. This is why conspiracy theories are on the rise. This is why people are getting more and more outlandish in their beliefs and their claims and their worldviews. It's because we are desperately grasping for truth, for reality, for stability. We are begging for stability, and we are willing to believe conspiracy theories and misinformation and propaganda in order to get there. We will side with our politicians. We will side with our religious cults. We will side with this. We will side with that. We will go the extra mile with whatever ideology. We are going the deep, dark path down. And unfortunately, with Bitcoin, people think it's the same thing. When in reality, the fundamental problem, what we're facing in this couple decades here, this 20, 30-year period here in this monetary transition, is that people are looking for economic stability. They're looking for monetary stability. They're looking for that straight line at which to price everything else in the world. Because for the last 80 years, that's been the US dollar and the US bond market. But that's starting to deteriorate. And in that face of that deterioration, there's this tiny little corner that we call Bitcoin. And that's why it's so important to get off zero. But again, to close out here, all these things are connected. There is a reason the cost of housing is out of control and why it's happening now. There is a reason why it's harder and harder to eat healthy, why food is getting more and more expensive, and there's more and more shortages, and all the food you're eating is incredibly more processed and has more and more sugar. There's a reason for that. There's a reason college tuition is becoming more unbearable and more detached from reality, while simultaneously the degrees have less and less value and the expectations get perpetually set lower. There's a reason why politicians are older, more polarizing, and more dramatic than they've ever been in history before. There's a reason why people are getting married later, having fewer kids over time, and spending less time with loved ones. There was a reason that people are treating the 1960s with a lot of sentiment, and it's because the U.S. began defaulting in nominal terms, in real terms at exponential rates in the early 1970s. There is a reason why angst, depression, and fear are skyrocketing. It's because we don't have this bedrock of ways to communicate economic value to each other because our currency is declining. There was a reason why people are resorting to side hustles, passive income, MLM marketing schemes, fake FTX schemes, looking for yield and tokens and artificial pumped up numbers on a screen by corporations and sketchy individuals. There's a reason people are resorting to these things on the side more than ever before. And there's a reason the older generations and the younger generations are having increasing distrust in each other, along with increasing distrust between political parties, as long with increasing distrust between religious factions and everything else. And again, if we don't contain this, if we let this get out of control, we will, not just the US, but the world, will have major hyperinflationary events, major defaults, or major wars. And so I hope, again, as well as you should, that we only have defaults and hyperinflations. And that's why it's so important I talk about Bitcoin. That's why I'm so obsessed about this thing. That's why I'm pounding the table so hard and have been for 3 years. But unfortunately, I know human psychology. And I know most of you watching this video won't believe what I'm saying. You won't even consider what I'm saying, because you think I'm insane. You think there's no possible way this guy could be right. And frankly, you don't want me to be right. Because like I said earlier in this video, none of us want to face the reality that prices should be going down and that people should be going bankrupt and default because we've had all this fake debt. None of us want to believe that. We would rather believe the lie that we can just print more numbers and everything will be fine instead of facing the truth. And so you don't want me to be right. You want to stick with your 60-40 portfolio. You don't want to think, wow, bonds are going down in terms of Bitcoin. You want to just ignore this video, click away from this video, and not even consider the things I'm saying. Even though over the last 3 years, again and again and again, I've never been surprised. I've never been surprised by these wars coming up, by these bank failures going on, by the economic craziness and instability, the insanity in the housing market. None of these things are surprising to me because, again, this is the reason why we are so extreme. Number one, money and price signals are information. This is the way we communicate economic value to each other. This is the way we price everything of value in the world. This money is being distorted. It's being distorted because humans have incentive structures, humans have feedback loops, and we'll do everything possible to preserve credit markets, to preserve the yield, to preserve the bonds, and to prevent ourselves from facing pain today, and so therefore adding on future pain to tomorrow. And so therefore, all communication is being distorted because all of our money is being distorted. All of our money is being debased away. And so because of that, and in contrast to that, Bitcoin's information, we don't know how to distort. Bitcoin has survived for 15 years. It has grown and faced many difficulties and many challenges over the years. China tried to stop Bitcoin. The Taliban tried to stop Bitcoin. Vladimir Putin tried to stop Bitcoin. Bitcoin's own creators tried to stop Bitcoin. People everywhere across the planet for over a decade and a half have tried to change the monetary policy of Bitcoin once. And not a single one has succeeded, and not a single one has come remotely close to succeeding. And the longer Bitcoin survives, the more electricity and the more energy that backs Bitcoin, the exponentially lower the probability that someone will ever be able to change the monetary policy of Bitcoin. Again, compare that to the United States, compare that to every other political currency in the world, where literally we change monetary policy on a weekly basis. Soon enough, we'll be changing it on a daily basis. This is the supply of the US dollar over time. This little fall here, you can see to the right, this little decline, this is what has caused these 3 of the 4 largest banking failures in American history, adjusted for inflation. This is what is causing all the economic instability we're facing right now, and all the collapse in credit, and all the difficulty, and all the skyrocketing interest rates. This little decline in currency, okay, we will not continue this much longer. We will continue the status quo of printing money as we always do. And so no matter where you go in time, no matter how far back you go in time, if you go to the 1980s, it's an exponential curve up and to the right. If you go to the 1960s, it's an exponential curve up and to the right. If you go to the 1990s, it's an exponential curve up to the right. If you go to 2000s, it's an exponential curve up and to the right. If you go to 2008 housing crisis, exponential curve up to the right. If you go all the way to today, we will continue this forever. We will continue the printing forever. We will continue the debasement forever, because this is fundamentally a human problem. This is fundamentally a feedback problem. And as long as humans are in control of the money, we will perpetually do this indefinitely. And as long as we do this indefinitely, purchasing power of all other assets, including and especially bonds, will go down perpetually. I've been saying this message for 3 years. People still not listen to me. I was talking about FTX. I never had any of my Bitcoin on FTX. I did not lose any money in the FTX scandal. And yet people outside of it think that I lost money because they're looking at Bitcoin from the wrong vantage point. You are looking at Bitcoin through a lens of political currency that is being manipulated by humans. And so your perceptions of Bitcoin are therefore being manipulated by those perceptions of these humans. And so where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? This is what's important for you to remember. This last slide, this is really what's important. Okay. Political currency is a horse. Bitcoin is a locomotive. These two forces are racing towards each other at a faster and faster exponential rate. Okay, we have one economic system chasing another economic system, and they're going to have a head-on collision. Now, most of us only know the horse. We only know of the horse. We've only had the horse for hundreds and hundreds of years, for generations. All we've known is a horse. And so if I come to you and say that a lifeless hunk of metal is going to run on steam, run on two metal beams, and move faster than your horse, cheaper than your horse, for a longer distance than your horse, like, you would not believe me. You wouldn't believe me. You would bet on your stallion every single day of the week. You would bet on your horses every single day of the week because it's what you understand. Of course, my horse is the better means of transportation. What are you talking about? My encouragement is that if I am right about Bitcoin, if I'm right about this thing, markets are not just going to collapse 80%, not just the bond market, the housing market, the American stock market, the European stock market, the Asian stock market, every stock market, every real estate market, every commodity, everything in the world is not just going to collapse 80%. It's going to collapse 80% before it collapses another 80%. And in just the last 3 years, everything's already collapsed 50 to 60% in terms of Bitcoin. It's just going to continue to happen indefinitely. And so if you try to understand Bitcoin or try to value Bitcoin in terms of distorted political currency units manipulated and managed and mismanaged by human beings, you are not going to understand it. And you are going to get caught in the traps like FTX and the alternate cryptocurrencies and the proof of stake and the proof of history and all the other proof of garbage forms of consensus. You have to stick with reality. Stick with reality. Stick with energy. Stick with first principles. Bitcoin is the best digital asset on the face of the planet because it is the only digital asset on the planet, and everything else is going down perpetually against Bitcoin, and there is no stopping it. As long as the future of humanity is bright, and as long as the network continues to survive and security continues to survive, Bitcoin will just have a higher appreciation, a higher purchasing price in the future. Again, what if you divide all the world's wealth, all the world's economic value into 21 million unique or 2.1 quadrillion, a fixed number of units into the future, the price of everything falls. And that is what is happening. Bitcoin is repricing everything simultaneously, everything. And so if you have zero Bitcoin, if you own zero Bitcoin, you have a 0% allocation to this future world, a 0% allocation to this future medium of economic exchange, to this future mechanism for communicating economic energy. Okay, if you have a 0% allocation to Bitcoin, you are exposed to this chart perpetually forever. And you can time to trade it. You can think that you're too late, but you're never too late because everything is going to always perpetually fall down indefinitely. So what's the takeaway? Takeaway number one, please get off zero. Consider buying some Bitcoin. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right. What's the percentage that you think I'm right? 98% of nations that have surpassed our debt levels that we reached 3 years ago fell into hyperinflation, war, or default within 15 years. Okay, 98%. Are you willing to take 5% of your ancient world assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, gold? It's 5% and allocate them into the correct way of pricing the world, aka Bitcoin. Are you willing to do that with 5%? What about 1%? What about 0.5%? What about 10%? Are you willing to do that? What about 20%? Okay, my argument would be that most people in a few decades will have the vast majority of their wealth, 60, 70, 80, 90% of their purchasing power saved in Bitcoin and not in tin and copper and American debt promises. That's so ancient. That's so archaic. That's like going across the continent in a horse instead of a locomotive. Okay, most people are going to have the vast majority of their wealth in Bitcoin in a couple of decades. And so my desperate encouragement is for you to take just a small nominal allocation, 1%, 3%, 5%, 10%, 20%, whatever that is to you, take some reasonable allocation and get off zero. Then beyond that, second, after you get off zero and buy some Bitcoin, take self-custody. Don't keep it on an exchange. If you keep it on an exchange, like FTX garbageness, this is what's going to happen to you. Because the fundamental problem is humans managing currency units. The fundamental problem is humans managing numbers. If you keep your Bitcoin on an exchange, this is what will happen to you. You will get rugged. You will lose all of your Bitcoin. So you must take self-custody. It's intimidating. It's a little difficult, but really, it's not that hard. Okay. The more difficult thing is not the technical. It's not the way of doing it. It's up here. This is the hard part about taking self-custody. It's about getting over your fear and getting over your discomfort and actually doing it. Just do it. Because when this is happening, when we have this kind of event like this, or like the banking failures that actually continue to blow up perpetually and don't get stopped by printing more currency units, when we have an event like Lebanon here, okay, these events happen incredibly quickly. Don't wait to take self-custody, okay, do it. Yes, as a job, as a career now, I help people take self-custody. So I am compensated for helping people do that. I can help you at the Bitcoin Advisor take self-custody of your Bitcoin. I can help you buy Bitcoin if you don't know where to buy it, and I can help you take self-custody where it's in your own control and not having a single point of failure for your long-term storage, okay? But again, this is not some kind of scammy trading course. This is not some kind of, there's no pressure here. It's just that I really wish people would hear the message of what Bitcoin actually is. And so that's my parting message to you. Consider getting off zero. Consider then, well, not just consider, but do it. Get self-custody once you get off zero. And yes, I offer my services if you need help with getting off zero and getting that self-custody. And so again, what's the final message of this video? Don't buy Bitcoin because you think it's going to go up. Buy Bitcoin because you know everything else is going down. Thank you so much for watching my content and being a supporter of mine. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun for me to do, and it's really meaningful to know that so many people are enjoying my content and learning about Bitcoin. I think it's so important for people to get off zero. In addition to getting off zero, it is really critical, it is really important that you also begin taking self-custody of your sats and of your Bitcoin. This is because if you have Bitcoin on an exchange or you don't have proper self-custody, this is going to be a massive problem for you in the future, most likely. If Bitcoin starts having rapid periods of appreciation and there are rapid spikes in demand for Bitcoin education, and for Bitcoin advocates and advisors, it's going to be increasingly important that you have self-custody of those coins. So my message to you is please consider getting that self-custody. Now, you can do that on your own. There are plenty of free tutorials online. There's plenty of great work like that. But if you want somebody to help you with self-custody, if you want somebody to help you take cold storage of your Bitcoin, of your Satoshis, if you want somebody to help you set up a multi-sig vault, to set up an estate plan, to set up a plan for you as a person, an individual, as a business owner, as a charity, whatever the case, I work at the Bitcoin Advisor, and I'm happy to say that I really enjoy it. I love working with my clients. My job is literally to help people buy Bitcoin and secure it properly for years, decades, and generations to come. So if you want to learn about my services at the Bitcoin Advisor and what we do, you should click the link in the description. Here you can read a bit about what I do. You can book a free consultation with me. You can book a free meeting with me. I'll send you lots of free complimentary paperwork explaining how multi-sig vaults work, cold storage, giving you all the education you need. Everything's fully open source, what we do. Our main goal is education, helping get coins out of exchanges, and people be able to not lose sleep at night when they buy and secure their Bitcoin. So you can feel free to book a meeting with me. The first one is free and complimentary, just to figure out what your priorities are and get that adjusted. But if that's something that could be used to you, I really highly encourage you to take self-custody, whether that's with me or not. Please just do it. But for the many of you that probably will eventually want a multi-sig collaborative custody vault, the Bitcoin Advisor could be the place to go. And so click the link in the description, check that out. Really appreciate your time.